The subject of the videos in this chapter is visibility and graphic control, and this video is devoted to a high-level overview of that topic. When contemplating visibility and graphic controls, folks often jump to commands like visibility graphics or hide in view. And this is because often what Revit displays by default in each view is suitable most of the time, and we therefore don't think about it until something is not to our liking. But if you really want to understand what is happening behind the scenes, you cannot start with visibility graphics or any of the other similar tools. This is because the first question you need to address is what, not how. Visibility graphics changes how elements will display in a view, but before its effects kick in, we need to determine what will display in the view. So how do we do that? Don't start with the visibility tools. Instead, start with the view's extents. Consider standard drawing types like plans, sections, and elevations. How does Revit generate these views? Well, it starts with a cut of the model. In elevation, this would be a vertical cut, usually outside of the building and facing toward the model. For a section, it would be similar, except that this time the cut slices through the model, thereby excluding elements that fall behind the cut. The most dramatic example is a plan. Here, the cut is horizontally oriented, showing only a thin slice of the model. Now consider any element category after such a slice. For example, the model overall may contain many more windows than what we end up showing in that floor plan slice. Therefore, if you seek to control the display of an element using customizations like visibility graphics, it may prove wasted effort if the element in question is outside the view extents and therefore not eligible to display in the first place. The specifics of controlling the view extents will vary slightly by view type. Elevations and sections are easily manipulated with on-screen controls, for example, but plans require a little bit more effort using the view range dialog. But once you're certain that the extents are correct for your view's purpose, you can move on to any required visibility and graphical customization. To do that, you can use several options, and here's a short list. Keep in mind that the effects listed here are progressive. So, let's take a look at each one of these. Everything begins with object styles. They set the overall default display characteristics for each category in your project and apply to all views that have not been overridden. So this is a global effect, and it's usually determined by some office standards. Now you can override the effects of object styles in several ways, starting with visibility graphics. Visibility graphics are still category-wide, but they apply only to the view in which they are applied. Now next comes filters. These are limited to a selection of elements determined by user-defined rules. This makes filters very powerful and flexible. And because the selection is rule-based, they continue to apply as long as the conditions that triggered them remain valid. Finally, overrides can be applied manually to individual elements. Preferably, this should only be done on rare occasions and when absolutely necessary. Now, I've also included temporary hide isolate here in the chart as well, but naturally, the most significant difference is that the effects are temporary and they do not persist with the model. So with this general overview in mind, the remainder of the videos in this chapter will move systematically through each of these topics. In this video, we're going to look at view extents and cropping. So I've got a few different examples to share with you, and I'm going to start with a site plan here. So I'm actually in the site plan sheet, and you can see that I've got a site plan view placed on this title block. And it's too big for the title block. You can see it's kind of going off the edges in all directions. Now, if we zoom out, it actually goes farther than it looks. So the full size of the viewport is way out here. And we're really only interested in the portion in the middle that looks at the building geometry and at the building site. So what can we do about that? Well, let's double click inside the viewport, and that will activate the viewport. And now you can see that you're actually able to select the model geometry. So you could work on the model as normal here, and the viewport is just grayed out in the background for reference. So what we're going to do now is turn on the cropping behavior of this view, and we have two ways to do that. The first is on the properties palette. So if I scroll down here and we're looking for the extents grouping, there are two checkboxes of interest: crop view and crop region visible. You can check crop view in order to enable the cropping of the view. And when you apply it, you're going to see a large majority of the view will disappear, and we're cropped in much closer to a smaller rectangle shape around the building there. Now, the other way that we could enable cropping is using this icon down here on the view control bar. You can see that that toggles that checkbox on and off as you choose it or not. Right next to that is a show crop region icon, and that one will enable the visibility of the crop rectangle or the crop boundary. And you can see that's the same as checking or unchecking this box here on properties. So let's make sure that both of these boxes are checked, or that you've toggled both of these switches. And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here. And as you can see, there was already a crop boundary configured for this view, which is a much closer crop than what we were looking at a moment ago. Now, it might be such that you want to adjust this now. So to adjust a crop boundary, you simply select it, and there are these small grip controls on each of the sides, and you can use those to manipulate the size of this cropping. So there is a dashed boundary line marking the property line, and I want to make sure that I'm seeing the entire property line in this site plan. So I'm going to stretch the grip controls in each direction large enough that I can see that complete property line. And there, that looks pretty good. Okay. So when I'm satisfied with the shape of the cropping, then I can just simply click away from it. If you want to see the crop region, you can leave it turned on, or you can hide it again. And then if you double click outside the viewport, notice that the viewport has now resized to fall within the sheet, and it no longer goes off the sheet. And so this sheet will print more correctly now. So that's our first example of working with a crop region, okay, and a practical reason for doing so. So next, let's open up the L1 architectural floor plan. And here you can see that the crop region is already turned on. So this rectangle out around the outermost edge here, that is the crop rectangle. And when I select it, notice that it does not have the little grip controls on any of the sides there. Now, I'm going to open up two other views. The south elevation, it also has the crop rectangle turned on, and it also does not have the little dots at the sides. And then finally, let's open up the longitudinal building section right here. Now, it also has the crop rectangle turned on, but it does have the little dots. So what's the difference? Well, let's tile these views first of all, so that we can see them all on screen simultaneously. So let's go to the View tab here. We're going to choose Tile Views, and then I want to zoom everything to fit. So you can use the View control bar and choose Zoom All to Fit, or you can simply type the keyboard shortcut ZA, and that will make each of the views fit their respective screens. So the floor plan and the elevation are configured the same way. The section is more like the site plan. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to double click over into the viewport of the site plan again and zoom in a little bit closer. Notice the presence of this dashed green box and this dashed green box. Now this one out here is labeled Views Overall. That is something called a scope box. And if you think back to one of our earliest videos where we first created the project from a template, the template that we used to create this project from included these two scope boxes. What is a scope box? Well, one of its jobs is to help you control the extents of your various views. So we're now going to see a direct example of that. If you select the scope box, you get these small triangle controls. I'm going to click this one here toward the east side of the building, and I'm going to drag it down to about the middle of the building and let go. Notice that both the south elevation and the floor plan have adjusted as well. So both of those views are using the scope box to size their crop regions. The section was unaffected. So if we click into either of those other views, architectural floor plan, and look at its properties, scroll down, you will notice that the orientation says by scope box, and then a little bit further down, you will see the scope box property in the extents area, and it is set to views overall. If you look in the longitudinal section and look under its extents, you will see that the scope box is set to none. And that is why the longitudinal section has these little grip controls, and that means that you could crop it independently. So what I'm going to do is, using the undo drop down here, I'm going to reverse some of those changes so that I've gone back to the full size scope box. I didn't want to actually crop those views, but I wanted you to see the difference in behavior. So the main advantage of a scope box is that with a single object, you can control the extents of multiple views. And in this project, all of the elevations and many of the floor plans are assigned to that single scope box. So by manipulating that one object, you have control over all of those other elements. So that's pretty powerful. Okay, so now what I want to do is take the architectural plan and make that the active view. I'm going to tab the views. That's going to remove all the tiles. The other views are still here. Now I'm going to choose Close Inactive Views, and the inactive tiles disappear. I'm going to zoom in on the stairwell and open up this section cutting through the stair. And I'll do that by double-clicking the blue section head, and then finally I will tile the views. So now we just have the section on one side and we have the floor plan on the other. Go ahead and select the section marker in the floor plan and notice what selects as well on the section side. The crop region of the section highlights when you pick the section indicator in the floor plan. Those two are the same thing. Now, there are little grips and controls in both views. So the little dots on the four sides of the crop region in the section allow us to control either the width running laterally or the height running vertically of this section. And we've seen this behavior. We could stretch it, we could stretch it, and it would adjust the cropping of that view. I'm going to undo and undo. Likewise, you've got these controls here, which do essentially the same thing to the width. Let me undo that. But in addition to that, we also have this one, which controls the depth. So when we talk about view extents, it's not just the 2D extents that you're seeing in the view, it's actually a three-dimensional extent. So if I take this grip and I stretch it back to just inside of this glass wall here, notice that all those mullions and glass panels disappear in the section view. If you pull it back even further to about halfway on the stair, notice that the columns and the opening in the wall disappear. In fact, if you want to go even further, part of the stair will start to disappear. So depending on how deep you make that section, it will display more or less geometry back in the respective view. So when we talk about view extents, we really are talking about three-dimensional extents. Now, this is true for elevations, plans, and sections. Now, to understand it in plans is going to require a command called view range, and we're going to talk about that in a future video. But it's a little easier to understand here with the section. So now what I want to do is just show you how we can customize the cropping of the view. It doesn't have to be rectangular. So let's do a quick example of customizing this section. So in the section view, I'm going to make sure the rectangle is selected, and then I can click Edit Crop. That will temporarily disable the crop, and now using any of the sketch tools, you can modify the shape. So I'm going to align this edge, then the floor and this edge, the inside wall here and this edge, and then finally the slope of the roof and that edge. Then I will go back to the Modify tool, pick lines, pick this diagonal edge here, and then finally use Trim and Extend to clean that up. When I click Finish, I now have a custom shaped crop region for this section view. So it doesn't have to remain a rectangle. And in fact, one last example, if you want to build a custom shaped crop as you're creating a view, that is also an option. So here in the floor plan, I'm going to go to this callout tool, and instead of drawing it as a rectangular callout, I'm going to sketch it. And now I simply click and draw the shape that I want, and this can be any custom shape that you like. And so I'm simply going to draw around the lobby and the corridor area there, click finish, and then that creates this callout. I'll move the symbol over here, select it, right click, choose go to view, and you can see that the crop region of this new view matches that custom shape. So those are some very common examples of working with view extents and cropping. And it is one of the very first things you want to consider before moving into any of the other topics that we're going to discuss here in this chapter about visibility.
This video is going to be part one of a two-part look at the view range dialog. View range is how we control what we see in floor plan views. So it works for both floor plans and reflected ceiling plans. And one of the primary things that view range does is determine where we're slicing through our model in order to generate the floor plan graphics. So that's what we're going to be focused on mostly here in this video. And then we'll look at some additional settings of the view range in the next one. So first, let's just talk about conceptually what we are going to be discussing here. If you consider a floor plan, the way a floor plan is generated is by taking the model and slicing through it at some location. Now, this is a pretty standard height that this occurs at, but you could really do this at any height that you like. And then whatever geometry is being sliced through at that level, that determines how to draw those elements in the plan view. So for example, if we consider things that are outside of the slice, like the sills of these windows here, you can see that they're rendered a little bit lighter than the walls themselves, which are being sliced through. So all of this is being determined simply by that cut height in the view range. So let's switch back over to Revit here and figure out where we can manipulate that. So I've got a really simple example queued up here for us to discuss this concept. I'm going to zoom in on this conference room here on the second floor plan. And there are these three windows over here on the right-hand side, but above them, there are some clerestory windows that are a slightly different shape. And perhaps I'd like to see those clerestory windows shown in this plan instead. Well, in order to do that, I would need to adjust the view range. Now, to help us visualize what we're trying to do here, I've created another view in this file. So I'm going to scroll down here, and under the elevations branch, there is this understanding view range elevation view. And you can see here that we're looking at that east wall of the conference room. You can see the larger windows down below. Those are the ones we're currently cutting through with this red line right here. And what we want to do is actually cut through these clerestory windows at this taller height, and that is going to be 12 feet if you're working in imperial or 3,600 millimeters in metric. So now that we understand what we're trying to do, I can close that elevation view, and let's go ahead and look for the way to achieve that. So one way to achieve it is to work directly here in this floor plan and look at its properties over here on the properties palette. So I'm going to scroll down, and we're looking for the view range setting. So it is down here underneath the extents grouping. You can see view range right there, and there's an edit button next to that. When you click that, it will display the view range dialog, and there's this little show button down here in the corner that will allow you to expand it open, and there's a little diagram that appears on the left-hand side. That diagram is annotated, and you can see the key on the far left and each of the items illustrated in the little diagram. So we're going to focus on item 2 there, which is the cut plane. And you can see over on the far right that the cut plane is currently set at an offset of 4 feet above the level in the imperial file. It's 1,200 millimeters in the metric file. So all we need to do is change this value. So I said we wanted to use a value of 12 in imperial or 3,600 in metric. Now, the trouble is, if you try to apply this, you'll get a warning that says that the top clip plane is now below the cut plane. So another thing you need to understand about view range is there's 4 values here. They can't get out of order. So that means the item for top needs to be the biggest number and the item for view depth needs to be the smallest, and the others need to fit in between. Now, the two numbers can be the same. They just can't switch places. So that means that for top, we could also put in 12, and that will allow us to continue. So you could put in anything 12 or greater, and you should be fine there. Now, we'll talk about top and bottom and view depth in that next video, but for now, we're just going to set them both to 12 here, and we'll click OK. And we have succeeded in getting our clerestory windows to display, as you can see. However, I wouldn't call the rest of the result in the floor plan a success. You can see several things have changed, which are not desirable. We are now slicing through the roof, both over here and over here. We're now seeing lighting fixtures in our floor plan. We are cutting above the doorways here and here and these two walls. We're not seeing anything in the conference room. So clearly this cut plane is much too tall for most of the geometry in this view. So what I'm going to do is use my undo drop down here, and I'm going to back up 2 steps there to get back to where we started from. And what I want to do is show you an alternative way that we could approach this. So rather than changing the view range of the entire floor plan, we can limit the effect to just a small area. And we do that by going to the View tab, Plan Views drop down, and using a plan region. So a plan region is just a sketch-based zone that you will set a different view range in. So I'm going to go to plan region. You can use any of the shapes that are shown here. I'll just do a simple rectangle, and then I will sketch out the rectangle around the area where the windows are. I'll click the finish button to complete that. Keep it selected. And then over here on the properties palette, you will now see an edit button next to view range. It's the exact same view range that we were just looking at. I'll set both of these values to either 12 or 3600 and then click OK. And now you'll see that the clerestory windows are displaying within that little zone only, and the rest of the plan is unaffected. So hopefully that quick example gives you some idea of how the cut plane in the view range functions, both globally across the entire floor plan or in a isolated region should you need to do so.
In this video, we're going to continue our look at view range and consider some of the other settings in the view range dialog. So I'm going to start right here in this little break room, and let me just zoom in a touch on that. And I'm going to go to the component tool, and there are some upper cabinets loaded in this file. So I'm just going to start typing the word cabinet, and that should find a few items, and you'll see an upper cabinet right here. Now, it doesn't really matter what size you choose, but just go ahead and pick one of the sizes and add a couple of those on the wall there to the right. I'm going to select one of those cabinets that I just placed, and I want to direct your attention to this property, elevation from level. Now, here in my Imperial file, that is at 5'6". Now, in metric, it's probably closer to 1700 millimeters. So if you think back to the video on view range cut plane, the last video, the cut plane was at 4 feet or 1200 millimeters. So clearly these pieces of cabinetry are above the cut plane. So that begs the question, why are they still displaying here in floor plan? Now, the fact is, I don't mind that they're displaying because usually we would want upper cabinetry to display, but I want to talk about why so that you can understand how these things behave. So to help us with that, I've got a section cut right here going through the break room, and I'm just going to double click that blue section head to open it up. And then I'm going to go to the view tab here, tile the views side by side, and then I'll zoom in here on the left-hand side of the section on this side, and of course, focus on the break room on the right-hand side. So I still have the cabinet selected, and I've superimposed this line work on here to kind of remind us of the settings in the view range. Now, if you want to see those yourself, you can click over here to the floor plan, scroll down and locate the view range dialog, or you can type VR. Make sure you deselect the cabinet first. And then there's view range, or you can type VR, and these settings match what I've illustrated over here. So remember that the cut plane is where we're slicing through the plan and we're seeing all the geometry below that point. Well, the cabinets are clearly above that point. So again, the question remains, why are they displaying? Well, I'm going to expand this show button here. And you'll see that there's this illustration, and I mentioned this last time. And this illustration also shows a few items in the zone between item 2 and item 1. So anything that occurs between the primary cut plane and the top must adhere to certain rules, certain criteria before it will display. So I'm going to cancel out of there. And the cabinets are adhering to those criteria. So let's look at another object that does not meet those criteria, like this doorway. I'm going to select that door, and I'm going to scroll up on the properties palette, and it has a sill height. And let's set the sill height of that to 5 feet imperial or 1,500 millimeters metric. Now, clearly the door still exists. It didn't get deleted. We can still see it here in section just fine. But notice that in the floor plan, it has disappeared. Okay, so the door clearly does not meet the same criteria that the cabinets do. So you may be thinking, well, it's just because the door is above the top of the cut plane. The cabinets aren't doing that. Well, let's test that theory out. So I'm going to select one of these cabinets, and I will increase the elevation here to, let's try adding about a foot or 300 millimeters. So I'm going to go to 6'6" in imperial, or you can just add 300 millimeters to whatever it is in metric. So now this piece of casework is doing the same thing as the door. The top of it is poking out of the top there, but notice that it is unaffected here in plan. So clearly that's not it, right? So what I'm going to do is use my undo drop down here and undo back a few steps to get the door to go back down to where it was previously. And now let's talk about what the rules actually are. In order to display in the zone between cut and top, the element must be of one of 3 categories. It must be generic model, or window, or casework. So the reason that these elements are displaying is because they're casework. And the reason that the door did not is because it is not one of those 3 categories. So in addition to being of one of those 3 categories, casework, generic models, windows, it also will display if any part of the element intersects this upper zone. That's why when the cabinet was poking through the top, it's still displayed. But if I were to select the cabinet and move it all the way out of that range, it will finally disappear. Okay. So in order to display, it's got to be those 3 categories, and it needs to fall within that zone. So that's the behavior of the above cut plane view range. Now I'm going to click to the floor plan here, and looking at my floor plans, I don't have a foundation plan. So what I want to talk about next is a similar concept related to view range, but in order to do it, I want to create a new floor plan. So let's go to the view tab here, floor plans drop down, and we'll choose floor plan. And then we're going to make an architectural plan. And the only view it's offering us is the one that I want to use, which is top of footing. So let's just simply click OK there. All right. Now, when this floor plan gets created, you're going to see an element right here, which is an elliptical arched opening, and a couple countertops appearing in the foundation plan. Now, what's a little bit strange about that is that those elements are not down at the level of the foundation. Now, to make this a little bit clearer, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select one of these, and then I'm going to click back to the floor plan, and notice what is highlighted right here. And then if I click this one and go back to the foundation plan, notice what's selected. And if I click this, so this is geometry that occurs in the floor plan. We've got this opening and these 2 countertops. Why are they displaying here in our foundation plan? Well, it's exactly the same issue. This is a generic model, and these 2 are casework. Now, to really understand this, let's take our section. Up here, you've got a split segment tool. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to click right about here with this little knife and then move down to move the bottom portion. You could move it forward or backward. I'm going to pull it backward to in front of that casework there. I'll click the modify tool to cancel. And now I'm going to take the section
and pan it over. And I've got some additional illustration over here, which will start to explain what's happening. The top of footing level is here. That means that when you measure 4 feet or 1,200 millimeters above that, your cut plane ends up right about there, just below the slab. If you measure 7'6" or 2,300 above that, the top of your view range ends up going right through the middle of these countertops and, of course, through the middle of that generic model opening. And that is why these 3 elements are displaying. So the solution in our foundation plan is to adjust the top of view range and just lower it down so that that is no longer an issue. So I'm going to click in the top of footing. You can locate and click the view range button or just type VR. And then what I want to do here is lower the top of the view range down. Now remember, these numbers can't get out of order, but they can be equal. So I'm just going to make the top equal the cut plane, and then I will click OK, and those elements will disappear. So the last thing I want to talk about is the view depth. Now you can see here I have created it at 2 feet or 600 millimeters lower than the bottom of this view. And that is so that the structural foundations underneath those walls can display. Notice here in the floor plan, they are not currently displaying, right? So if we go back to view range in this view, you're going to see that currently we don't have a view depth at all. The bottom and the view depth are both set to 0. So the view depth is a special zone that will display any of the geometry that falls within it using a special override. So the first thing you need to do is enable it. Okay, so I'm going to do that with that setting that I've got illustrated there in the section. So -2 feet in imperial or -600 millimeters in metric, and I'll click OK. Now, the trouble is, it looks as though nothing happened. So the extra little wrinkle that we have here in this particular file is that if you zoom out a little bit, we've got this site plan model right here. And it turns out that that site plan model is just simply covering up the foundation and making it impossible to see it. Okay. I'm going to take that site plan model and go to my sunglasses, and let's just hide that temporarily. Okay, we can deal with it more permanently in a future video, but for now, I just wanted you to understand the concept of view depth. So now let's go back to view range, VR. I'll set this back to 0 and click apply. The foundations disappear. I go to -2 and I click apply, and the foundations reappear. So now you can see the way that the view depth operates. Now notice that they're coming in not full intensity. They're kind of like light gray there. The reason for that is anything in the view depth zone will appear using a special override line style. So this illustrates perfectly the point I'm trying to make in all the videos in this chapter. The very first thing you always want to do when you're trying to change the way something appears in a view is to start with the view's extents and then move on to other settings. So start with the what before you move on to the how. What do you want to display? I want to see the footings, right? So the footings aren't displaying. How do you make those display? That's the first thing you solve. Then you can move on to how they're displaying. I'm not satisfied with the way these footings display. I want them to have a dashed edge. That comes next. It doesn't matter if you make the edge dashed and you can't see them. Okay, so always start with the what before you move on to the how. All right, so how do we make this a dashed edge? Well, that's on Manage. We're going to go to Additional Settings and Line Styles. And the reason for that is if you expand this, and let's just widen this column, it's a little narrow for me. Okay, there is a line style here called Beyond. That is what we're seeing there for those footings. And you can see now why it's gray, right? Because the color is assigned gray. Well, it's got a solid line pattern, and I can just choose a dash pattern and click OK. And now all those edges will display in dashed. This video is going to be our first example of changing how elements display instead of being focused on whether or not they display in the first place. So the last several videos, we were concerned with what displays in a view. And so if we didn't see elements we wanted, or if we did see elements that we didn't want, then we were concerned with adjusting things like the view extents and the view range and so forth to be able to determine which elements were eligible to display in the first place. Once you've gotten elements to display correctly in the view, then it's a matter of, are they displaying as desired? And now we move our attention to how they're displaying. And this video is going to be the first look at that. And we're going to focus on the most global way to modify how elements display, and that is object styles. So I've got a section open here, and I'm just going to zoom in and point out a few problems that I see. There are some wall elements, and I've got one here and here and here that are all being sliced through in this section. There's a roof element that's being sliced through, and those are nice and bold on the edges to indicate that they're being sliced through. Ceilings, on the other hand, here, and this floor element, they are not showing that bold rendition, and I'm not satisfied with that. It's difficult to tell that those items are actually being sectioned through, and I want to address that. So that's going to be a job for object styles. And the reason we want to use object styles for that is this problem is not limited to just this view. If I open up another section view like this transverse section, notice that I have the same problem here. So I've got a roof that's bold, walls that are bold, but floors and ceilings that are not. So what I want to do is find a way to modify this behavior, but not have to do it in every single view independently. And that's exactly what object styles is for. So I'm going to go to Manage, click the Object Styles button here. And it's possible you might need to expand some of these columns here to be able to read everything. So I'm just going to expand the first couple like so. And then notice that here on the Model Objects tab, we see a list of all the model element categories. Now I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom and locate the Walls category. And then let's focus on the line weight column. So notice there are two line weights, projection and cut. So for walls in projection will use a pen weight 2. Walls in cut will use a pen weight 5. So Revit line weights start at 1, which is the thinnest, and go on up from there. And so a pen weight 2 is much thinner than a pen weight 5. Now you can see examples of that if I move the object styles out of the way and we look off here in the distance. Here and here we have two examples of walls in cut. They're nice and bold with the pen weight 5. And then off in the distance on this soffit condition here, we have some additional walls here, but we're seeing them uncut off in the distance, so they're using only pen weight 2. So I would like the floors and the ceilings to behave the same way. So it's as simple as scrolling back up to the top of the list. Let's locate the ceilings category. And I'm going to change the cut line weight for ceilings to pen weight 5, press enter, scroll down, locate the floors category next, and repeat the same thing, 5 and enter. Let's click OK. And now you're going to see all the floors and ceilings in this model are now displaying in the same bold pen weight here in section. But more importantly, that change applies everywhere. So you don't need to do the change again in the transverse section or any other view. It's already done in every view when you do the object styles. That's the advantage of object styles. So if you discover a deficiency in a particular object that really should be handled globally, then the right place to edit it is object styles. Let me show you another example. I'm going to open up the default 3D view. And I'll zoom in, hold the shift key, tilt down slightly, and we've got several roofs here, here, and here. Now, those roofs could be different types, they could be different configurations, but they're all this bright green color. So if I'm not satisfied with that bright green color, then I can actually change that default. The reason they're bright green is because of a setting in Object Styles. So I'm going to go to Object Styles, and this time scroll down and locate the roofs category. And when I select it over here in the material column, let's just widen that up a little bit, you can see that there's a material assigned to the roofs called default roof. Now there's two remedies to this situation if I'm not satisfied with the green color. I can click the edit icon here, and in the material browser I can change the color, or I could just simply remove that material designation and click OK. And that's what I'm going to do. And then the roofs remove that green color. So those are two really simple examples of modifications you might want to consider in object styles. I do want to stress, however, that object styles is considered an office standards command. And so if you have a CAD or BIM manager at your firm who manages those sorts of things, you should definitely consult with that person first before you make any changes in object styles. As we continue working our way down the display hierarchy, in some of the earlier videos, we considered the crop regions, the view extents, the view range. Then we moved on to object styles, which configured the global display settings. And now we're ready to start talking about individual view display settings. So there will be many situations where you want to customize a particular view to convey certain kinds of information, and you won't want those settings to apply to any other view. That is the purpose of the visibility graphic overrides command. So in this video, we're going to be talking about visibility graphics, and I'm going to show you several examples of using this tool. So I'm going to start right here in the first floor plan. And the first thing I noticed is that it's an architectural floor plan, but it's showing a lot of site information. So I don't think I want to see all of that site information here. So the way that we can control that is using visibility graphic overrides, and we can hide the categories that we're not interested in. So let's look at that as our first example. So I'm going to go to the View tab, and the visibility graphics button is right here, or you can type the keyboard shortcut VG. When this dialog displays, I want you to take note of the message at the top. It says visibility graphic overrides for floor plan L1 architectural. So even though this dialog looks a lot like the object styles dialog, it's actually very different. And anything that we change here only affects the current view. Now notice that the first column here is the visibility column this time. So that's also unlike object styles. And so that means if you want to hide a category, you just simply uncheck the box. So the first category that I want to hide is the planting category. So I'm going to scroll down here and locate planting, and I will uncheck it, and let's click apply. And you're going to see some trees disappear there. And if I kind of move this out of the way, you can see the trees have disappeared throughout this view. Now, we've got some windmills over here. We've got a property line over here. I'd like to hide some of that information as well. If you scroll down and locate the site category, you will see that several categories also have subcategories. Property lines are a subcategory of site. Now, if you were only interested in hiding the property lines, you could uncheck and click apply, and it would just hide that, but the windmills would stay. If you would rather hide all of the site information, then instead you can uncheck the parent category, and that would apply to everything, including the subcategories. So the property line would also disappear in that case. Now, in addition to those categories, I'm also seeing the roads and the sidewalk and the parking lot. That's all controlled by the topography. So if I scroll down here and locate Topo Solid and uncheck that, and let's click OK now, you can see that I now have a much cleaner first floor plan. So that's our first example of modifying things with visibility graphics. So the next thing I want to do is show you or confirm for you that all of those changes only affected the first floor plan. So if you look here on the project browser, you've got a branch called Floor Plans Site Plan. I'm going to expand that. And then there's our site plan. I'm going to double click to open it up. And we've seen this view before in an earlier video, but let's zoom in here a little bit. Now notice that the trees, the property line, the windmills, the parking, it's all still displayed here. But if you zoom in a little closer, you'll notice that in addition to that, we're also seeing electrical outlets and light switches. So it doesn't seem like those categories ought to display on a site plan. So let's go right back to visibility graphics, or VG, and let's hide the categories we don't want to see here. So that's going to include things like data devices, electrical equipment and electrical fixtures, and lighting devices. And when I click OK, all of those elements will disappear. And now that looks a little bit more correct for a site plan. So I'm going to close the site plan view. And those are two really simple examples of just focusing on visibility that we can use visibility graphics for. But it's visibility and graphics. So it's not limited to just visibility. So what I want to do next is create an example where we're going to do both visibility and graphics. So to do that, though, I need to create another view. So I'm going to start with my level 1 architecture plan. I'm going to right-click it, duplicate the view, and there's a couple ways we can duplicate, and I'm going to demonstrate the first two. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is just labeled duplicate. That's going to add the word copy 1 to the end of the name. I'm going to right-click and choose rename, press the end key on my keyboard to jump to the end of the name, backspace out copy 1, and then put in furniture at the end of the name. Here, this view now is going to be my furniture plan. And what you'll notice is that when we do duplicate, it creates another view of the model itself. So you see the model geometry, but when you compare that to the architectural plan, it contains none of the annotation, none of the tags, the dimensions, or the text. Now, if you want a copy of this view that contains a copy of the dimensions and text and annotation, then what you can do instead is right-click the view, duplicate, and choose duplicate with detailing. So that's the difference between those two commands. So I'm going to right-click that one and rename, and then remove copy 1, and instead write power as a suffix. So I now have 3 copies of my first floor plan, my default architectural, and then a furniture and a power plan. So I'm going to go to the furniture plan and do some more work in visibility graphics. So let's go to VG, or visibility graphics button, and I want to hide the same categories we hid in the site plan. So I don't want to see any of the electrical information in this view. So I'm going to scroll down and hide data devices, hide electrical equipment and electrical fixtures, and hide the lighting devices. And I will click apply there. So you're going to see all of those elements disappear. So now let's move on to the graphics idea, right? So that's the visibility, but remember, this is visibility graphics. So what else can we do? I'm going to select the furniture category, and notice the presence of all these override buttons. So there's lots more that we can do here than just hiding things. So I'm going to click the override button for projection lines, and I'm going to boost the line weight up to a pen weight 4 and click OK. Then under patterns, I'm going to click the override button and change the pattern to this diagonal crosshatch small. And then I'll change its color to this medium gray and click OK. So let's click OK and then find the OK one more time. And now you should see that all of the furniture has taken on this crosshatch pattern, and its outline is now bolder than it was before. So this serves to emphasize the furniture here in the furniture plan view and make it a little bit more prominent. So now let's direct our attention to the power plan. Now here in the power plan, I obviously don't want to hide the electrical outlets and so on, because that's the purpose of a power plan. Now you could hide the furniture so that the electrical outlets stand out, but it might be nice to see the furniture here. So instead of hiding it, let's go to visibility graphics and look at one more example of changing the graphics. So as an alternative to scrolling through the list, you can type the letter F. That takes you down in the alphabet, and then you scroll a little further, and there's furniture. Just another way to do it. And over here on the far right, there's a halftone checkbox. I'm going to click that and click OK. And now that effectively de-emphasizes the furniture without hiding it entirely. So those are just some examples of the kind of things you can start to consider doing in visibility graphics. Now, there is certainly plenty more that you can do. But what I want to leave you with is making sure that it is very clear that all we've done is customize the way things look in this video. We have not actually changed the model in any way. So when I created these 3 views, these are not copies of the model. This is still one unified model. If I grabbed hold of this reception desk here and moved it, notice that as I click through the other views, not only is it moved in each of those views, it's still selected. There's only one reception desk, and we're just simply seeing it in 3 different views and rendered in 3 different ways. So feel free to experiment further with visibility graphics here in this view. This is a very common and powerful command that once you start using Revit on a regular basis, you'll find you're using visibility graphics quite frequently as well. In this video, I want to consider the fundamental difference in behavior between model geometry, things like walls, doors, floors, roofs, and annotative or detailing geometry, things like detail lines, dimensions, tags, and text. These 2 classifications of elements behave fundamentally differently in Revit projects. And it's really important that you understand that, especially when you consider things like manipulating and controlling those elements' visibility. I've got a floor plan here that contains both types of elements. So there's naturally a bunch of model geometry. And, if we kind of zoom in and look around, you can see I've got tags for the windows, tags for the doors, tags for the rooms. Okay. And there's some dimensions out here. So I've got both kinds of elements. Now, this is the main architectural floor plan, but if you watched the previous video, you recall that we created 2 duplicates. So we had a furniture plan, and notice that this view does not contain any of that annotation, none of those tags or dimensions, and then this power plan does. It's an exact copy of the original architectural view. So when we first created this power plan, we duplicated it with the detailing from the architectural view. But let's say that now we are looking at this and deciding that maybe we don't really need to see the door tags or the window tags after all. Well, your first instinct is probably to say, oh, sure, I know what to do. Let's go to Visibility Graphics. And here you'll find there's an Annotation Categories tab. So far, so good. Let's expand this a little bit so we can read it better. And let's scroll down, and we've got categories like door tags, and scroll a little further down. We've got our window tags here, and I could just simply hide those 2 categories and click OK. Problem solved, right? Well, I'm going to recommend that you don't do it that way. Now, at first, it may seem surprising to hear me say that, but I've got a few different reasons why I don't like that approach. First of all, it's redundant. The idea behind tags is that tags, by definition, are already view specific. All annotation is. So we've already seen this, that annotation exists only in the view that it's created in. And that means that it will already only show in that view. If you hide it, you could send the wrong message, or it could be confusing to people. Like, let's say that at some point somebody kind of comes over here and says, oh, I think I want to add some window tags to this view. Now, maybe they weren't in the meeting where we decided we didn't want to see window tags in the power plan, or maybe we've changed our mind, whatever the case may be. So I'm going to go to the tag command here, and I'm going to touch this window. Now, it generates a warning, but maybe I missed that warning. Maybe I didn't notice. And I go on to this next window here, and I go, well, that's strange. Why isn't it displaying these tags? And so maybe I try again. And it may take me a while to notice that it's actually creating the tags, but simply hiding them because that category is hidden. So when I finally figure that out, perhaps I cancel out of the command, I go back to the View tab, go back to Visibility Graphics, or type VG, and go back to Annotation, and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to locate the door category and turn it back on, and the Windows tags and turn it back on, and I click OK. And now notice that I ended up with multiple tags in the same location. Now, at first, that may not be that big of a deal, but it certainly will be a little bit disruptive to realize that you have these double tags, but it also might be frustrating for the person who did the second set of tags to realize that they wasted all that effort creating that second set of tags when there was a perfectly good set of tags just hidden from the view. Now, I understand why folks' instinct is to hide the geometry. You know, they're worried, oh, just in case I'm going to hide it, we may want it again later. But that's not the way that annotation is designed to behave in Revit. In Revit, model geometry is visible in all views, so therefore we want to hide or show when it comes to model geometry. Annotation, by definition, is view by view, therefore we want to either add the annotation or remove it. So what is my recommended solution to not wanting to see the window or door tags here in the power plan? I recommend that you select everything, go to Filter, check None, select Door Tags and Window Tags, click OK, and then press Delete. And I know at first that might feel uncomfortable, and you're not sure that that's correct, and you're wondering, well, why wouldn't we just hide it just in case? I'm going to ask you to trust me on this. This is the right way to do it. Now, there are so many easy ways to annotate views. We're going to talk about this in a future video, but let me just show you a quick example right now, okay? It's not going to be door and window tags, but I'm going to focus now on room tags, okay? I'm going to select everything once again, go back to Filter, check None, and I'm going to pick room tags, click OK. And this time I'm not going to delete them, but looking at my furniture plan does not contain any room tags, and it might be nice if it did. Well, rather than painstakingly create each and every room tag, perhaps I look at this other view and I say, hey, there's a perfectly good set of room tags right here. All I need to do is select them as we've done, copy that to the clipboard, click over here to the furniture plan, go to this drop-down menu right here, and choose Paste Aligned to the current view. And I'll get a new set of room tags in exactly the same locations as the parent view, and it's just that easy. So if for some reason you decided you wanted window tags here in the furniture plan, instead of having to painstakingly go place them one at a time, you would simply go back to a view like the architecture plan, select them all. And in fact, you can even do that by right-clicking and saying, select all instances in the view. And that's even faster than using Filter. And then with those window tags selected, copy them to your clipboard and paste them to the other view. So that's the way that I recommend that you manage annotation. If you don't need the annotation in a view, don't have the annotation in the view. So don't hide it, simply remove it. And then if you don't want to see a model element in a view, then yes, by all means hide it. Because if you delete something in a model view, it is deleted everywhere. And by the way, if you delete something that has a tag on it, like say this window, not only is it deleting the window, but it will also delete any tags that rely on that window. So deleting model geometry is a much bigger deal. So I'm going to undo and undo to get the reception desk back. Okay. But deleting tags, it's a totally different proposition. Deleting dimensions, it's a totally different proposition. So those elements can safely be deleted, and it's actually preferable. I rarely, if ever, hide anything annotative, and I recommend that you don't as well. If you take the time to customize the display of a view, and then you realize that you have other views in your project that have similar customization needs, it can become very tedious to try to remember what all the different settings were that you configured, and then manually reapply those to the other similar views. Now, this can happen if you have multiple floor plans that are similar, or elevations or sections, or really any similar views that have the same display needs. Well, in any of these situations, this is what a view template is good for. A view template is a tool that can capture all of the visibility settings applied to a view, and then you can easily reapply those settings to other similar views. So we're going to look at some examples of setting up and using view templates here in this video. So I'm starting in the architectural power plan, and what I want to do is capture everything that we've established here in this power plan and apply it to the second floor. Because if you look here, I've duplicated a level 2 architectural power plan, but it's still showing the site information and it doesn't quite look the same. So I want to customize that now. So rather than try and remember what all the settings were that I did on the first floor, I'll just simply go back to the level 1 power plan here and create a view template. So I'm going to go to the view tab, and there's a view templates drop down right here. And we want to choose create a template from the current view and give it a name. So I'm going to call this typical power plan and click OK. Now that will create the view template, and it will display the view templates dialog and show you all the settings that have been captured in that view template and give you an opportunity to further customize them. So we were mainly concerned with VG overrides for model right here, but notice that it includes all the visibility graphic overrides. It includes the scale, model display, whether shadows are turned on, background settings, etc. So it includes literally anything to do with the configuration of this view. So this is a very, very powerful command. Now you can even uncheck things that you don't want to include, but in this case, I'm going to accept all the defaults here and simply click OK, and that creates that view template, and it's now ready for use. So how do I use it? Well, I'll just switch back over here to the level 2 power plan, use the same drop-down menu, but this time I'm going to apply the template properties to a current view, and I'll choose typical power plan and click OK, and it's really just that easy. So now you're going to notice that the second floor power plan matches the display of the first floor one. So there's one small issue that I noticed though. Previously, we had set the furniture to halftone, and it appears as though that setting has been disabled. So I'm not sure why that is, but one of the advantages of view templates is if you discover something wrong with a view, you can just simply recreate the view template and do it again. So I'm going to go to Visibility Graphics, and I'm going to locate the furniture category, select it, turn on halftone, click OK. So now the furniture is all halftoned. I'm working in the second floor, but it doesn't really matter because you can capture the view template in either floor. I'll go back to View Templates, create template from the current view, and what you want to do is type the same name. When you do and click OK, it will tell you that that already exists and ask you if you want to replace it. And I'll answer yes. Again, you get to confirm the settings. I'll click OK. And now I have created an updated version of the power plan. However, it's important that you understand that you've only updated the view template at this point. You have not updated any of the views. So there's two methods to using view templates. The method I'm showing you now allows you to create the view template and then you choose when you want to apply it and how. So if I want to reapply it to the first floor, I would simply repeat the process here and apply the template properties to the current view, choose typical power plan, click OK, and now it matches the second floor. But notice that the process of creating and applying it is still a manual process, but you can easily reapply it once you've made updates. Now, it turns out that there's a slightly faster way to do this. You could do it on the project browser. So I could have selected level 1 architectural power, hold the control key down, level 2 architectural power, and then with both of those views selected, and that could just as well be 10 views or 20 views, then you right click and apply view template is here, and then you would get the same opportunity to choose the view template and click OK. All right, so that's a little quicker than doing it one view at a time, but you would still need to apply it on a view by view basis. Now, let's say you don't want to do that. I don't want to have to apply it on a view by view basis. What I would rather have instead is for it to automatically be applied and automatically keep my views up to date. So let's look at that workflow using the furniture plan. So I'm going to double click the level 1 furniture plan, and then I'm going to come up here to the quick access toolbar and close inactive views. So that's going to close both of the power plans and leave me with just the furniture plan. Now, the furniture plan already is correct because we've set up all these settings in an earlier video. So I'm going to go right to View Templates and choose Create a Template from the current view, give it a name, and then click OK. I'm satisfied with all the settings, so I'm going to OK again here. And now I have this view template. So here's the difference in how we're going to apply it this time. I'm going to select the level 1 architectural furniture plan and hold the control key down and level 2 architectural furniture plan. Now, I just showed you that we could right click. That's not what we're going to do here. What we're going to do instead is go to the properties. Up here, it'll say views 2. So we're applying properties to 2 views right now. And when I scroll down, you're going to notice that there is a view template setting here under identity data. It's currently set to none. I'm going to click that and choose the typical furniture plan and then click OK. So now if I double click to open up the level 2 furniture plan, you can see that it matches level 1. Now I'm going to do window tile. So tile the views or type WT so that we can see both of these furniture plans side by side. And now I want to show you how this alternative way of applying the view templates behaves. There are some consequences. If somebody comes into this view and decides they want to change the scale, everything's grayed out. What about the level of detail? What about the shading mode? Really, anything that you see here, it's all grayed out. Suppose they want to change visibility graphics, VG. All of that is grayed out. Now, why is that? Well, because everything right now is currently being controlled by the view template. So that means if I want to change any settings whatsoever on any of my furniture plans, I need to return to the view template and modify it there. Now, how do I do that? Well, it turns out you can click the drop down and the final command on this menu is Manage View Templates. So I'm going to do that. Locate my typical furniture plan view template right there. And remember all these settings over here? Now you can change anything you like. So I'm going to do something that'll be really noticeable on the screen. So for VG overrides for model, I'm going to click Edit, scroll all the way down to the bottom, locate the walls category, and then over here in the cut column for patterns, I'm going to click the override button, and I'm going to apply a solid fill pattern to the cut of the walls. And I don't want it to be solid black, so I'm going to choose something that's not quite as dark. Maybe I'll use this purple color right here, and I'll click OK, OK again, and then one more time, and then finally dismiss the View Templates dialog. And now you're going to see that I have this solid fill purple poche applied automatically to any view that is using the furniture view template. So that's the difference in behavior if you choose to apply it selectively or if you choose to use it as a setting of the view. So again, it's not right or wrong either way. Both methods are perfectly valid. It really is a matter of personal preference and how you want to manage things. But regardless of how do you choose to use the view templates, the view template tool itself is an incredibly powerful way for you to manage visibility settings across really any size project, but certainly on larger projects, it becomes very handy. We have many ways we can hide elements in Revit. We've only looked at some of them. So there are the temporary hide isolate tools. There is visibility graphics where we can hide categories. Most hiding takes place on a view by view basis. Okay, almost all methods of hiding will happen view by view. So that's important to understand. And it is possible to even go down and hide individual elements at the object level. So I'm going to show you how to do that here in this video, but I'm going to recommend that you do it very sparingly. Okay, so let's just jump right in and let me show you how to hide elements individually. And I'm going to do that by working in this 3D view, selecting one of these columns, and I want to hide this column in the view. There's three ways you can do it. There's a right click where you can say hide in view by element. There is this little light bulb here, hide element, or you can see there's the keyboard shortcut EH. So use whatever method you wish there, and you can hide that column. So I'm just going to repeat that with another one, and now I've hidden two of those columns there. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, those elements are only hidden in this view. So if we go to some other view, like the level 1 architectural floor plan, and zoom in, notice that all of the columns are still visible here. Okay. Now, I was hiding things one at a time. It's not necessary that you hide them one at a time. You can do a multi-selection like so and hide several elements all at once. All right. So let's say you've hidden some stuff and then you change your mind and you want to get them back again. Now, of course, right now I could simply undo, but you know, when I close the file and I go home for the day and I come back tomorrow, I'm not going to have the option to undo. So when something is hidden and you want to restore its visibility, how do you get it back again? Well, if it's done in visibility graphics, it's easy because you just go down through visibility graphics and you check and uncheck the boxes, right? So that's no big deal. But when it's done by object, you don't have anything like the visibility graphics dialog to go to. So how are you going to get these objects back? Well, there is a special display mode down here on the view control bar called Reveal Hidden Elements. And if you click that, it will put this colored border around the screen. It will tell you that you're in Reveal Hidden Elements mode. And then you could select one or more of the elements that you've hidden. And if you hover over them, it will tell you whether they are hidden by element or by category. So in this case, it knows that these columns were hidden by element. You can see it very clearly there. And then there's an unhide by element button right here, or the keyboard shortcut is EU. Now I've restored the visibility of those columns, and I can turn off the temporary mode to return the display of the model to normal. So that's a very simple example of using element hide and then reversing the operation. Okay. Now I'm going to zoom out a touch, and you'll notice that out here, there's still some site information. And in an earlier video, we hid that. Now, the way we did it in the earlier video is my preference. We went to Visibility Graphics and we located the categories in question, and we hid those categories. And that's what I recommend that you do. But based on what we're covering in this video, you might be tempted to just simply select this and say, well, I don't actually want to see any of that site information. Why wouldn't I just hide the Revit link, right? So that's an object, and I could go up here and choose hide element. Problem solved, right? It hid the topo, it hid the parking, it hid any of the trees and the planting, all of that stuff. Well, you certainly could do that, but I prefer to do it, as I've already indicated, using the categories that we've done in the previous video. Or if you're not going to do it with the categories and you want to just hide the entire model, then there's also a way to do that in Visibility Graphics as well. If you go to VG, there's a Revit Links tab, and you can actually uncheck the Revit link, which would have the effect of hiding it in this view. I think either doing that or coming over here and going category by category is the preferred way. But if you choose to do what I've just done and hide it by object, the only way anyone would be able to get it back is using the Reveal Hidden Elements mode again. Now, when I go to this mode, it's interesting, right? Because it's not actually highlighting the Revit link in color, but it does say it's a hidden element if you hover over it. So that's one of the reasons that I don't love hiding it by object. So notice that the trees are showing up in the color, and that's because we previously hid that category. So it's a little tricky here if you hide with Revit links, and this is why I'm not really a fan of using hide by element for the links. So I'm going to select this and unhide it. And then, as I say, if you want it to be invisible, then either hide the categories or the link itself. So are there any good uses for hide by element then? Well, I think there's a few possibilities. What about this section right here? This is kind of a temporary section that we used when we were figuring out view range. And maybe I don't want to delete it, but I certainly don't want to see it in this view. So if I tried to hide by category, it would hide all of my sections. So this section would disappear and any others as well. So I don't want that, but maybe I just want to hide this one. Well, that might be a good use for hide elements. Another possible scenario is maybe this reception desk is going to be provided by others. And so I don't want to confuse folks looking at this view into thinking that they need to install this item as well. So perhaps I would do hide element on that as well. The only trouble with that is you need to be very careful because remember, hide by element is view by view. So just because I hid it in the main architectural plan doesn't mean it's going to disappear in the other views as well. So you might find yourself having to hide this element in lots of different views. At which point, if that's occurring, you might want to think twice about your approach and think if there's a better way. But anyway, that is the hide by element command. It is definitely a powerful and useful command if you use it sparingly, but that's really the key. Make sure you're using it sparingly and try not to overdo it. Throughout this chapter, we've looked at lots of ways to control the visibility of elements, and in the previous video, we did some manual modifications to the visibility and we hid a few elements. In this video, I'd like to show you what I consider to be a better alternative. We're going to look at something called display filters. Now, display filters are somewhere between what we were doing with Visibility Graphics and what we were doing with element level modifications, because they're more parametric like Visibility Graphics is, where Visibility Graphics applies to the entire category in a view. The filter applies to a collection of objects that meet a certain criteria that you get to establish. So you can say, give me all the objects of a certain size, or all the objects of a certain category, or all the objects that meet X, Y, and Z. You get to establish what those criteria are, And then once you've got that collection of objects, you can do something to it, hide it, show it, change its graphics, and so on. In this example, we're going to look at some filters that are already here in the model, and then we're going to create our own custom one. So for starters, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here in the floor plan, and I want to point out to you that there's a section line right here called section 1, and another one right below it called longitudinal section. And if you look at the two of those, you can see they look quite different. Longitudinal section is using solid line and it's a black color, but the section 1 is red and it's got this dashed line. So what's the difference? Why is it that the section 1 is displaying differently like that? Well, that is the consequence of a view filter that was part of the template that this file was based on. So if we consider the previous video, we had a section mark running down the middle of the break room, and we decided to just simply hide it. We didn't want to see it anymore, and we hid it. I'm going to bring that back now. So if you watched the last video, you know we can go to Reveal Hidden Elements. That will reveal anything that's hidden. I can select that section, and then I'm going to choose Unhide Element or EU, and then I'll turn off Reveal Hidden Elements mode, and now I have this section back displayed again here in this view. Okay. What I want to do is I want to make this one behave the same as this one. So how is it that these are different? Well, it turns out that there's something called a display filter, which is changing the graphical display of section 1 based on the kind of section that it is. So if you select section 1, you'll notice that it is a working section. That's the name of the type that's assigned to it. So I can select this section right here, the one that I just unhid, and open up the type selector, and you will see that there are several choices here, including working section. So if I choose working section, watch what happens to our section at break room. It now matches the graphics of section 1. So next, let me explain to you how that happens, right? That is a display filter. Okay, so let's take a look. I'm going to go over here to the View tab, and there's a Filters button right here. When the Filters dialog opens, you'll actually see that there are lots of filters in this file. Okay, all of these came from the template that this was started with, and most of them have to do with other disciplines, you know, MEP and electrical and structural, but there are several that are useful for architectural here as well. Now, we're going to focus just on the one that we are looking at here for the sections, and it's called Views Working. Now, the first thing is that a filter will apply to one or more categories. So over here in the middle, you'll see categories, and the easiest way to see which categories this applies to is to check this box here, and that will hide anything that's not checked. So this filter, Views Working, is applying to callouts, elevations, and sections. And from all of those categories, it's looking at the family and type, and if the name contains the word working, then it triggers the filter. That's it. So the way you can think about a filter is, imagine it's just asking a question from the model. It's saying, hey, callouts, elevations, and sections, does your family and type name contain the word working? And if you kind of phrase it that way, like a yes-no question, it makes a lot more sense. So then the answer can only be yes or no. Yes, my name does contain working. No, it does not. If it contains working, then visibility graphics can kick in and change the graphics of that collection of objects. If it says no, then it's just simply ignored. So what I'm going to do now is cancel out of here. We didn't make any changes. And let's go to visibility graphics. And what you'll notice is there's a filters tab here. And the Views Working filter was already added to this view. That, again, came in as a consequence of the template that we started this project with. And this right here is why it's using a dashed red line. It's also set to halftone. So you can see that those are a little bit lighter as well. So anything that answers yes to the question is getting the dashed red line, and anything that is not is being ignored. Now we could go a step further. And earlier in the previous video, I decided I wanted to hide that section. I didn't want to see it anymore. Well, visibility is one of the choices here. So I could simply turn off the visibility, click OK. And now both of those working sections will disappear in this view. And of course, the other sections here, 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 those are unaffected. So that's a much more effective and powerful way to control the visibility of those elements, because you're able to create a subset of elements based on logical criteria and then only apply your modifications to that subset. Now, I should point out that everything I've just done is just in the architectural floor plan. So if I open up another view like the furniture plan, notice that the working sections are still displayed here. Now, they are dashed red. Okay, so the filter is applied here in VG and making it dashed red. It's just that it's still visible. Now, notice I can't uncheck visibility, and you may recall why, because in an earlier video, we applied a view template to the furniture plans. So the way that you would have to modify the furniture plans to hide the visibility would be to edit the view template, which I could do by going to Manage View Templates, scrolling down, locating Furniture Plan, clicking over here on Filters, uncheck the visibility, and then OK out of all of this. And then it would disappear not only here, but also on the Level 2 Furniture Plan, because it's using the same view template. So I'm going to close both of these furniture plans. For the last example in this video, let's consider the reception area. In the previous video, we hid the reception desk and its chair. So let's restore those now with unhide element. And then I'll turn off reveal hidden elements mode. And let's look for a better way to isolate these items. I'm going to select both of these items. And what I want to do is think about some way that I could establish that they are different than the other furniture in the model. Now, there's a number of ways we could do that, but one of the simplest things you can do is simply come over here to the comments field and put something in the comments. So I'm going to write by others in the comment field for those two items. That's step one. Step two is to go to filters and create a new filter. So I'm going to use the new icon down here. I will also call this by others. Click OK. And then in the middle here, I will check the furniture category. Now you can select more than one category if you want, but for this example, furniture by itself is suitable. Now you'll have a drop down over here of all the properties or questions that you can ask your furniture. Well, we put our information in comments, so that's what I want to query. I want to query the comments of the furniture and ask one of these questions. Is it equal to? Does it begin with? Is it greater than? Etc. Now, there's a couple ways you could do it, but I'm just simply going to do equals, choose the value by others from the list here, and click OK. So now I have a question that says, hey, furniture, do your comments equal by others? So the final step is to go into Visibility Graphics and say what to do with the items that answer yes to that question. So here's Visibility Graphics. I'll go to Filters. I will add a filter, and I'm going to add the one called By Others. Click OK. And now what would you like to occur to the items that are answering yes here? I'm going to change the fill pattern to a solid fill, and I'll just choose this bluish color here. Okay? You can do whatever you want here, but when I click OK, notice that the reception desk and chair now change color, and it's very easy to tell that those are different somehow. Now, the cool thing about having this approach, doing it this way rather than right-clicking and selecting it individually, is if you go to any other item now and decide that it is also by others, it will immediately take on the characteristics established in the filter. So it's a much more powerful and consistent and easy to maintain approach. So even though it takes more effort to set up the filter in the first place, I think it's completely worth it. So I hope that you'll agree that using display filters is a superior approach to these kinds of issues, and I encourage you to explore them further. In this video, I'm going to look at two different graphical tools to help us fine-tune the graphics in a view. The first one is going to be the linework tool, and then a little bit later, we'll look at depth queuing. So for the linework tool, I'm going to start here in this floor plan, this furniture floor plan, and I would like to see a dashed line indicating where the balcony is up above. So there's a balcony looking down into this reception space, and we really have no indication of that currently in the first floor plan. But if we open up the second floor plan, you may recall that we had this floor element kind of looking down into the space below. Now, I could just use detail lines like this and set them to dashed lines and trace over that. That would be fine, except that there's a really good chance that if you later change the model in some way, that those detail lines would need to be manually updated, that they're not going to follow along. The linework tool is going to give us a better chance of keeping it associated with the underlying geometry. So that's what I want to show you here. Now, in order to use the linework tool, I need to be seeing the object that I want to modify. That's the floor in this case, and it's not currently visible. Easiest way to make it visible is to turn on the underlay in this floor plan. So instead of none, I'm going to set that to L2 and then apply that. And now you'll see ghosted in this gray line indicating where the floor element is up above. So next, what I'm going to do is zoom in nice and close here, and I want to show you how the linework tool functions. So we're going to go to Modify, and the linework tool is right here, or LW. And what you want to do is choose a line style from this list right here. So I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and there's this one called Wide Red, and I'm going to touch this diagonal line right here, and then maybe this edge of the column. Now, I'm going to click the Modify tool to cancel out. And so what's really interesting about the linework tool is you can touch individual edges of the underlying geometry and customize just that edge. So it didn't do the whole column, it just did that one edge of the column. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking that's great, but what if I change my mind? How would I reverse it? That's not at all intuitive. So I want to go through that first before we continue here. So let's go back to the linework tool, and the way that you reverse this effect is to open up the list of choices here and change it back to by category. Okay. And then you touch the same edges over again, and they will return to displaying the way the category told them to, rather than the override that you've applied. Okay. So now that you understand how to use the linework tool, now we can apply it to get the effect that we were after, which is to display a dashed line overhead. And it turns out that there's a line type here just for that purpose. It's called overhead. And I'll click that. And I'll touch this little horizontal line, the diagonal line, and then the vertical line here. And that will, of course, go down the full length of the floor element. Now, you no longer need to see the underlay to keep this effect. You can set it back to none. And notice that when you do, the dashed line still continues to display. This dashed line is the floor. So notice that if I move my mouse there, that actually selects the floor. You could click Edit Boundary and try changing the shape of that floor. As long as you change the shape in such a way that you're basically just moving some of the lines around, it should continue to apply the dashed line. If you radically change the shape and add new edges and so forth, then you'll probably need to customize the linework modifications that you've made. Okay, so just feel free to experiment with that if you like to see that a little further. Meanwhile, I'm going to move down to an elevation now. So I'm going to scroll down to the elevations and double click the south elevation to open that up. And I want to show you some other examples of the linework tool here in this elevation view. But first, I need to change a few things about the way it is currently displayed. I don't want it shaded, so I'm going to change the shade mode here from shading to hidden line. That looks a little better. And then the next thing is these trees are really overpowering. They're just kind of covering up everything on the elevation. So the way that I like to deal with trees is to go to Visibility Graphics. So I'm going to go to View, Visibility Graphics, or type VG. I'm going to go down to the Planting category, and I'm going to change the transparency. So I usually like to go with something about maybe about 85% transparent. Click OK. Click OK again, and now you're going to see that all of my trees are mostly transparent, and I can actually see the building through those trees now. If we go back to the floor plan and considering the shape of the building here, this wall in the foreground is closest to us, and then these other walls start to recede back. So I want to start to convey that in the south elevation here. So I'm going to focus on this wall first, and I'm going to use the linework tool to kind of boost up the line weights in this foreground element to make it appear like it's coming forward. So I'm going to go to Modify, click the linework tool, And instead of overhead, this time I'm going to use wide lines. And I'm going to touch some of the edges here, like the sloped edges of the roof, and then that little edge of the eave, and this edge of the eave, and then start doing the walls. Now, notice that the walls are in 3 pieces because of the soldier course, so you will need to click 3 times going down the length of the walls there. Now, if you click under the eaves, it's going to go all the way across, and I don't really like the way that looks. But notice the little grip here. You can simply stretch that back to that location and adjust the effect so that it only applies to part of that line. And I think that is a really nice benefit of this tool. Now, once you've done that, maybe you realize that it would be nice to boost those lines a little bit, but just maybe not quite to wide lines. Change to a different line type like medium lines, and you can touch the same line again, and it will apply a different effect to part of the line. So I think that's super cool that we can use the line work tool multiple times on the same edge and apply different effects as appropriate. So that's one way that I could start to give some depth to this elevation. But there is an alternative way. So let me just take a few minutes to show you that tool. It is called depth cueing. Okay, so depth cueing is going to apply a grayscale to the elevation, and the objects in the foreground will be the darkest, and the ones that recede back will become lighter. So you get to depth cueing by going to the Visual Styles pop-up, choosing Graphic Display Options, or GD is the shortcut. Then here in this dialog, you want to expand depth cueing and check this box to show the depth. So then you just have these little sliders and you just start to drag them and click apply. And at first the effect is kind of subtle, but after a while you'll start to see, if you drag it quite a bit, what starts to happen. I mean, eventually you could get the whole elevation to disappear. So you want to find the right settings that are going to give you an appropriate level of grayscale. Now, you can couple this near and far slider with the fade percentage here. And if you start to adjust that, that will compress the gradient that's being applied so that the furthest back object isn't quite as light. It will become a little bit darker. And so just play around with these sliders and adjust them until you're satisfied with the effect. And then using that in combination with the line work tool, you can work on this elevation until it satisfies your own personal graphical style. So I encourage you to continue working on it to do so.
But now I'm sure you've seen how useful it can be to have a good 3D view to study your model and investigate how things are shaping up as you work. Well, we can go much further than the 3D views that we've already created. In fact, we can create 3D views that cut away from the geometry and reveal the insides of our model and allow us to really start to understand how things are fitting together and clashes that we might have or other issues that we might want to investigate. So in this video, I'm going to show you 3 different ways that we can create cutaway axonometric views. So I'm starting here in the default 3D view, and this is just the view that Revit creates when you click the little birdhouse icon, as you've no doubt seen in previous videos. Now, that view is located for me down here on the coordination branch under 3D views, and you can see it right there in bold. And of course, it's bold right here. Now, what I'm going to do is just sort of hold my shift key down and drag my wheel to tip this a little bit so I can see it a little bit better. And we're going to crop away some of the site here. Maybe I want to focus in a little bit closer on just the building. Okay. So the first way that I'm going to show you how to do this is just using the properties on the properties palette. So I'm going to scroll down and you're looking under extents for the section box checkbox. And all you need to do is check that. And when you apply that, you'll see this box appear out here. And I zoomed in a little too close to show it to you. So let me zoom back out. And you can see these little grip controls on all 4 sides. There's also one here on the top and one on the bottom. And all you need to do now is just sort of start dragging these until they cut through the portions of the model that you want to exclude. So you can see that I can just sort of work my way around all 4 sides, making adjustments like so. Now you could even do the vertical and start to, shear off the roof or something if you wanted to, but I'm going to leave it the full height for this first example, but that is certainly a possibility as well. Now, Alternatively, a little bit quicker way to get to the same place would be to use a scope box. So you may recall that when we talked about scope boxes in an earlier video, that they can control the extents of not only datum elements, but other views, right? So that includes 3D views. So I've got this scope box out here called Views Overall. So instead of turning on the section box and manually adjusting the grips, what I could have done instead is scroll down here. And it is right above section box. You can see currently the scope box is none, and I could change that to Views Overall. And now it crops in a little bit closer, and the crop of this 3D view matches that scope box. Now, the section box is still here, but notice that when I select it, it no longer has the grip controls. And that is because it is now being controlled by the scope box. So it's one or the other. You can't have both at the same time. So that is how you could start with an overall view and then crop it in a little bit closer in a kind of a manual way, right? So it's completely manual using section box, and it's a little less manual using a scope box. Now, very important, this next thing. Let me redirect your attention to the name of the view here, this curly bracket 3D name. That's Revit's default 3D view. So if you want to preserve what you've done here, it's very important that you get in the habit of right-clicking this and renaming it. Because if we change the name, then the behavior of the default 3D view button is going to change the next time we use it. So let's call this overall axon. Doesn't matter what you name it. And now I'm going to click away from it, deselect. And now watch what happens when I come up here and click the default 3D view button again. So notice that I get a brand new curly bracket 3D view, and it's kind of in the default orientation. It's not shaded, right? Like it's just a complete default view. Now, I do want to point out something else about the default 3D view. Any new view that you create in a Revit project will go into a branch on the project browser based on your default discipline. So notice that my default 3D view went to the coordination branch. Okay, yours might have gone somewhere else. It's possible it could have gone up here to architectural. Now, what controls that? If you go to the file menu and go to options, there's a number of options you can configure in this dialog, but the one that I want to direct your attention to is here under view options. And notice that mine is currently set to coordination. I'm going to change that to architectural. And the next time I create a new default 3D view button, you're going to see it's going to go into a different branch. So we'll see that in just a few minutes. Let's just click OK here, and let's continue with this 3D view now. So I'm going to scroll back down to where this view is. It's right there. And I'm going to zoom in. And now what I want to do is, instead of cropping this manually, I want to base the cropping of this 3D view on one of my existing views. And the way you can do that is using the view cube over here on the right-hand side. So just right-click anywhere on the view cube. A menu appears. Then you can do Orient to View. And notice that you can orient it to your existing floor plans, elevations, sections, and even other 3D views. So I'm going to orient it to one of my floor plans for this example, and I'm going to choose L1 Architectural. And what that does is it just simply matches the orientation and the cropping of that existing floor plan view. And if we zoom in, you can start to see the effect there. But I think it'll be easiest to understand what we've done if we go right back to the view cube and click one of the top corners there to orient it back to 3D. And now you can see that what we've created is this little cutaway plan version of the 3D view. Now, the section box is out here, and you can just see that it's really long and thin, but you've got the little grips, and you could maybe crop out those windmills or, crop out any other geometry out in the site that you weren't interested in. So you can certainly fine tune it after you've oriented it to the view, but orient to view is a good start to kind of get you close to what you're looking for. Now, just like we did before, it's a pretty good idea to get in the habit of renaming this. So I'm going to call this one 3D First Floor. Okay. Now, a moment ago, I changed my discipline to architectural. So now watch what happens when I click the default 3D view button again. Instead of getting the curly bracket 3D view here under coordination, I'm going to scroll up to the top, and it's now under architectural. So where exactly? Well, under architectural, under a new branch called 3D views, and there it is right there. Okay, so it's still called curly bracket 3D. It's just that it's now been placed in a different discipline. So let's look at our third way that we're going to create a cutaway 3D view. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important to rename first, because you're going to see that this next command is going to take over our curly bracket 3D view here, right? So now I'm going to start, you can start this command in any view you like. So I'm actually going to start it in a floor plan. So I'm going to go to L1 floor plan and zoom in, and I want to create a cutaway 3D view of the lobby area. So in order to do that, you can start with a selection of geometry. So I'm going to start right out here outside the building and kind of drag about like so. Okay, so that's going to select most of the items that I want, but it selected a little bit more than I wanted. I don't want this floor element out here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just simply hold my shift key down and drag a crossing selection back like so to try and remove that element from the selection. Now it seems to not be working, so let me go to the filter instead, and I will uncheck floors. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Okay. So now I have a selection of elements focused on just the lobby area. And the simplest way to create a cutaway 3D view is to simply click this little button right here or use the keyboard shortcut BX. So this is selection box, and it will make a 3D view that matches whatever you have selected on screen. So you can see that it is now focused on my lobby area. I could hold the shift key and I can orbit it around. I can zoom in. This is the section box out here. It has the little grips. So if I want to peel off that front wall there so we can see inside the lobby, maybe do the same thing with the roof there so that we can kind of look down into it and get a more interesting looking view. Those are all things you can do after you've created the initial view. Notice that this is the default 3D view. This is why I keep emphasizing renaming the view. So let's rename this one again. And I will just call this 3D lobby. And then as far as fine tuning this, you can use any of the techniques that we've already looked at in earlier videos. You can change the shading and the display. So for example, these scope boxes and levels always end up displaying anyway. So one of the simplest things you can do is just select that geometry and then use this little light bulb here and choose hide category. Now that is exactly the same as going to visibility graphics, VG, that we did in an earlier video, and unchecking the appropriate checkboxes, scope boxes, levels. It's just a little faster to do it that way. You could do the same thing with these room separation lines. I don't really want to see those. Hide category. If you wish, do it in visibility graphics, but it's just a little bit faster here. In fact, you can even hide the section box. So we can hide that category, and then here's our final result. We have a large collection of graphical display settings that we can configure for any view. Now I'm going to demonstrate here in a 3D view, but you can use this dialog in plans and elevations and sections as well. So to get started, how do we get to the dialog in the first place? It's called Graphic Display Options, and there's two ways to get there. You can either use the pop-up menu on the visual styles and choose Graphic Display Options, or it's also available on the View tab on the graphics panel right here with this tiny little icon here. GD is the shortcut. So go ahead and open that using whichever one of those methods you like, and that will display this dialog with a number of configurable settings. Now, the first thing is the style, and that matches the pop-up menu that we saw on the view control bar at the bottom. So you can do everything from wireframe, which I rarely would do, to hidden line, of course, which is what we were seeing to start off with, to various kinds of shading. So there's this shading and consistent colors, which is like a flat shading, and then two modes that display textures and realistic. So if I click realistic and apply it, you will see some textures appear, and this also takes into account the lighting. Usually takes a little bit longer. If you choose textures, then that superimposes the textures on top of consistent colors, and that's usually a little bit quicker. Now, if I OK out of here and I zoom in, you can see that it's using the material textures. We've got wood grain on the windows, we've got brick on the walls, we've got concrete on the slabs, we've even got grass out in front. Okay, so that's a little bit of what's going on there with textures. So I'm going to leave that mode turned on for now. Okay, so the next setting is smooth lines with anti-aliasing. Now to show you that, I'm going to zoom in on an area where
we're seeing some diagonal or curved edges. So I want to focus your attention on the reception desk. You can see there's some diagonal and curved lines there. And also this column out here in the foreground. If you look at that, you can kind of see the stair-steppiness on the edges. So anti-aliasing is an attempt to correct that. So if we go to graphic display options again and check this box and click apply, you should now see all of those jagged edges smooth out, and that generally looks a little bit better. So let me OK here and zoom back out so that we can see the entire model again, and then I'll go back in. The next setting is transparency, and it's kind of interesting because you can start making the entire model semi-transparent, but this is all or nothing, so it applies to the whole model. What I prefer to do instead is something that's a little more selective. So if we OK out of graphic display options for a moment, you can select one or more elements on screen and then use this paintbrush tool here and either override by element or category. So if I wanted to apply transparency to all the roofs, for example, I could do it by category. If I wanted to apply it to just this roof, I could do it by element. And now there's a transparency slider here. So what I can do is just sort of boost the transparency of that. And now notice that that one element is semi-transparent. And I personally think that if you want to introduce transparency to a view, that's probably going to be the better way to do it rather than making the entire view transparent. But it really just depends on what you're personally trying to achieve. So let's go back into graphic display options and keep going here. Silhouettes is a feature that I love in concept, but I'm not wild about the execution. So the idea here is quite simple. It will silhouette or profile all of your elements by adding whatever line style you choose here to the profiles. So to see the effect most dramatically, I'm going to use wide lines and then I'm going to click apply. And let me click OK here and we'll kind of zoom in and look around. Okay, I think it did a nice job on this column. It did a great job on this column. It looks okay on the walls and the windows, but it's a little too bold on the soldier course. So there's areas where it's better than others. It's okay on the roof, but I really wouldn't want it bold over here by the walls. The furniture doesn't really look good at all. It's definitely a little too bold there, especially when you consider the handles and the details on the chair. Now, some objects are ignoring it entirely, like the railings and the stair, but it is doing a decent job here on the roof element and the ceiling element. So it really is hit or miss, okay? So I like it in concept, but I'm not sure I love the execution of it. Now, the effect is global and it is tied to the scale. So if you want to kind of reduce the overall effect, we could adjust the scale in here. So in the imperial file, I'm going to go to 1/4 inch equals a foot. In the metric file, that's 1:50. And that drops it back a little bit. So it's not quite as bad in some of the areas where it became a little too muddy. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're not satisfied with the result, you really don't have any choice but to just turn it off. Okay. You really can't control it selectionally or, on individual elements. So it's kind of an all or nothing sort of thing. So I'll leave that to you, whether or not you want to leave that enabled. Let's move on to shadows next. We have two kinds. Now, I really love ambient shadows. What that does is just adds a little extra punch to the view. You can see that it kind of dirties up the corners a little bit, almost like somebody took a piece of charcoal and kind of charcoaled in the corners and the edges. And it just gives it a little bit more interest. And I think it couples really well ambient shadows with this textures mode, consistent colors, or with hidden line. So if you just want a simple presentation where it stays in hidden line, but you want to show just a little bit of shading, ambient shadows is a great way to do that. Here's what hidden line looks like without ambient shadows, right? It's kind of flat. Here's what it looks like with it. It looks much better, right? So I personally love ambient shadows. I use that all the time. Now I'm going to go back to textures mode and I'm going to leave the shadows on, but let's talk about cast shadows next. So cast shadows is exactly what it sounds like. These are shadows cast by the sun. Now, in order to control the direction of those shadows, you need to consider the lighting. So if we expand lighting, you can then click in the sun setting window here, and the default scheme is just something called lighting, which I like to think of as over-the-shoulder lighting. So it's basically 45 degrees left or right, and there's some presets to that effect here. Now, if you're satisfied with that, then nothing to change there. But if you'd rather set the direction of the sun based on the real location of the project, then change to still rendering instead. The location of the project is here. You then get to set the date and time. And then when you click apply, it will adjust the shadows to match your actual geographic location. And in addition to that, there are some presets here like the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the spring equinox, right? So you can choose whichever one you prefer. And I think I liked the summer solstice best here, and I can click OK. Now, the intensity of the shadows is controlled by this slider right here. Now, it starts off being 50%. If you do a larger number, it will get significantly darker. If you do a smaller number, then it will get lighter. So I'm going to try about 40 or maybe even 35. Okay. And then click apply. And I think that looks a little bit better. You know, those shadows aren't quite so intense anymore. Okay. Now, if you're using realistic up here, then there are some settings that pertain to that in terms of exposure control and so forth. So you can look at those. If you want to introduce a background to the image, you can. There are some options here where you can do none, you can do the sky, a gradient, even an image. Now, sky sounds nice, and I'll click apply there, but that really doesn't look much like the sky. Well, what you need to do is consider that we're in an axonometric view. So the only way you'd see the sky is if you tip this up to look at the sky. So I think sky works best with camera views and elevation views, but not so much with this axonometric. So instead of sky, I'm going to change that to gradient, which just gives me an opportunity to have a little bit more interesting background, but I don't necessarily have to be pointing at the sky to see it. All right, now we already talked about depth queuing in an earlier video. There's an interesting setting here called sketchy lines, and if you turn that on and, kind of drag these sliders, and let's click OK and kind of zoom in there, it sort of roughs up all the edges and makes it look a little bit more hand-drawn. So that can be a fun effect if you're interested in that. And I'm going to go back in, and I think I'm going to turn off the sketchy lines for this example, click apply. And the final thing I want you to see here is when you're satisfied with the settings, when you've arrived at a collection of settings that you like, this dialog has a direct link to view templates. So you can save this collection of settings directly to a view template so that you can reuse it in other views, and you don't have to try and remember what your favorite collection of settings were. So I encourage you to get in the habit of doing that because that can be really helpful. So spend a little bit more time in this file experimenting with the graphic display options. As I said at the beginning, it's not limited to just 3D views. So if you want to go ahead and open up a plan or an elevation or a section view and try some of the settings there as well, I think you'll find that there's a lot of different combinations that you can explore to really give each of your views a little bit of punch and try and find that collection of settings that matches your own personal preferences.